Okay, well, we've got a panel. We can have a discussion later, but now I'd like to call up Stephen Hope from Winfrosoft. Stephen has been Managing Director and CEO of Winfrosoft for the last 10 years, more or less.
For my sins.
Pardon?
For my sins.
For your sins. And Winfrosoft are, as the title might even suggest, Microsoft supporting software company?
Yeah, I mean, effectively we started off as a security software company adding value on top of Microsoft solutions, and since then we've evolved into basically an authentication vendor, but with a difference. So if you look at the market today in terms of authentication, in terms of where we're at, everyone's been the same thing for like a couple of decades, nothing particularly new, and we're still stuck with the age-old problems. So we started out in the authentication world trying to take a different view on how to do things differently, how to actually solve the problems we have today in the market. So when you had the question stated about this topic we have here, we'll go back. Anyway, I'm glad you guys put the question mark in the end about biometrics. Has the time come? Because it really is a question. But what question are you asking about it? Biometrics have been around as a concept for a while, a very long time. Where is it being used? Why is it being used? Is a pretty important question. Are biometrics good for identity, or are they good for authentication? Both. What type of biometric? There's a lot of questions that go around biometrics, and I think a lot of this is why we're still not using it really today for anything particularly important in day-to-day lives. And think about if you're going to use something with your fingerprint as a common biometric we all think about today. Apple shoves it down our throats every day with the latest iPad. I'm going to log in with this. How many times are you guys told to change your password? Every time Adobe gets hacked, you get told to change it again. You know, theme. How many times can you change these? Just things to think about. Is it convenient to unlock your phone with it? Well, yes. How high assured are you that the device really knows it's you? When you enrolled yourself with that device, how many times did you have to put your fingerprint on for it to actually set you up? And that's done so that it has a good idea that it's you. It doesn't really know it's you, it just thinks it is. Until the guy from YouTube who used the Jelly Baby hack and gets on your phone for you. Okay, so they're great to have these things, and they have some convenient advantages in our lives. But we've got to take a step back from the purest scientific side of it and think, how do you apply this in the real world? In terms of, I'm a human being, organic material, I'm not trying to prove to this lump of plastic made in China that I'm me. What is the stuff in between? And what are the security threats and practicalities of using that connection? Now think about the readers. The biometric reader. It doesn't matter if it's an iris scanner, voice biometrics, fingerprint readers. How can those be affected and fooled into thinking that you are someone else or someone else is you? And that's the real world stuff of where the problems of these comes in. Who makes that technology? How easy it is to get around? However, the question of today, what problems we face today, is this kind of rubbish. Despite biometrics and all this fancy encryption and certificates and all the smart cards, all this stuff's not new. This is the rubbish we're stuck with in the real world today. What's the biggest bane of your existence right now? I'm going to take a guess that it's probably this thing, right? Password. Despite everything you guys have got going, when your thing, whatever it is, fails, what's the reset process? It's send you an email, type in your password, and you go back to where you started at the beginning. It's the lowest common denominator that everything ends up coming back to. It is a password. Or a PIN code, something of a static nature. Yet, just going back to basic concepts here, the theoretical level. It's a secret. How do you keep a secret a secret? Simply, you don't give it away. Now, you've all got secrets. Yeah, guaranteed. I could ask you to tell me some of them. You probably won't want to. And that's a good thing, because you know in your head that things are supposed to be secret for a reason. So what are we doing with the password? It's supposed to be secret, right? Every time you use it, you're giving it away. And then you're told to keep giving it away in the name of security. And this is the fundamental flaw of a password. You can't fix a password or a PIN code. It's fundamentally flawed as a concept. It was great when they're using it back when they're building pyramids, but that's kind of as far as we've evolved them. We're still using the same shared secret, but an oxymoron in itself. But that's kind of what everything comes back down to. Because this seems to be the most common way that you can end up interacting between a human being and a lump of plastic that's made in China to prove who you are, because it'll work on any operating system, any device, any screen type, any form factor. It hits that lowest common denominator, and that's what ends up winning in the real world marketplace out there. There's a lot of clever stuff that's been on the market for a long time in terms of theoretical what you can do. How much has it impacted your day-to-day lives? A lot of things have improved in terms of generic identity with cloud, etc. But how do you log into these things still today? It's generally still with a PIN code or a password. So once upon a time, people thought, yeah, passwords suck. You hate them. They're not secure, easily compromised. So what we're going to do, we're going to throw two-factor at the problem, or oath, or whatever standard you want to call it this week. Okay, who's got one of these things in their pocket right now? Got one alert up to it. Okay, so no one's got a phone on them. Okay, everyone doing some sort of banking these days will get a text message or some other form of second factor authentication. When you go and buy something with two-factor authentication, keep in mind how many factors you're actually using. Okay, this stuff is only one factor, it's something you have. You've got that lump of plastic, or that lump of plastic. What is the second factor? You want to take a guess? It's still the PIN code or a password. It's the knowledge factor, it's something that's in your head. It still goes back to the age-old problem. Okay, we just heard the thing about biometric stuff now. How do you secure your bio ID, for example? Back to a PIN code or a password. Okay, this is real-world problems we have today. And biometrics has a place. Looking forward to debate on where that fits and your opinions of where do you think biometrics fit. So I think it does have a role. But just ask yourself, does it make sense to have one thing that verifies or presents an identity and assures that identity, authenticates the identity? They're two separate tasks for two real good reasons. Should they be done by the same thing? Convenience-wise, yeah, great. Security-wise, well, you've got one thing to compromise, you've done the whole lot. Okay, bit theoretical, but no, that's where we are. Let's go back to that slide. And yeah, identity is pretty important. You need to know who you are. It's also useful to have multiple identities and multiple reasons. And then you're going to start asking yourself, how do you verify each of those identities? Because you're going to want to prove who those entities are. Even when you get a passport, that was a discussion a few minutes ago, an identity document. Okay, it doesn't prove who you are, it's a claim of who you are. Someone else has to verify that identity. So the guy at the border patrol will open the book and think, that picture kind of looks like him. Well, no one ever looks like their passport photo, do they? But the guy sitting there who's never met you before has to make a call on that. Sometimes they might swipe the passport through a scanner, which will tell them that yes, that document is legit. Doesn't really link it to you as a person. The person holding it in front of them doesn't necessarily have to be that person. We've seen cases in the press where people have gone on holiday to Spain using their sister or their brother's passport, and they get through the gates. The passport's valid, that entity is valid, it's just not the person carrying it, but they kind of look about right because they're related. Okay. So yeah, I think it does play a part, but we should be really clear where it actually fits in the real world. FIDO is creating some interesting things around that. But again, that's because the device storing the biometric data is the device verifying the biometric data. As soon as we get into a world of giving your blood samples and your fingerprints and your iris data to the government or to your bank or to whoever else do you think you might trust? Yeah, who out of those people would you give your biometric data to hold for you, to centrally verify it? So stuff to think about. You're going to change your password all the time. Just think, how often could you change your raw biometric data? Or do you trust a third party to have some linkage of that data? Well, do would that be? No. Anyway, just some thoughts and questions throwing out there for you. We obviously have some solutions available right now on the market in the real world that uses alternative authentication mechanisms, using either information you already know in your head, pattern-based authentication, all sorts of tools that do work on today's hardware and today's form factors, because that's something that can work in the market today. Some of it could work with biometrics in terms of proving an identity, using biometrics as an identification, not as an authentication. Okay. So happy to have some conversations and have some chats with you after the break. But yeah, should we jump in and do a panel chat?
Yeah.
Where do you want us?
You can come and sit up here. JJ, do you want to come? So I've not thought about this before, but we all know that passwords can get hacked. But then I realized that having your fingerprint hacked is actually a very painful concept. Just something to think about. Okay, so we've had
Identity correction.
Correcting
Correcting the identity. Case in point.
So we've had some sort of conflicting views on biometrics, which is excellent. Some very good points made by Stephen. The question of identification, authentication, and where do they meet, how do they marry. And the question that you posed was, biometrics are good, they're valuable, where do they fit into the whole process? So, Laurent, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to, maybe it's a comment, maybe it's a question. I got a little triggered when you said, well, where does, say, fingerprint identification fit? I use it on my iPhone 100 times a day. Fits really well. I like it. And I get annoyed when I reboot my iPhone, it's asking me to actually input the code. I don't want to do that. I don't want people to see it. I just want to do it. I just want to put my fingerprint in. And then you talked about a hack, and I didn't quite understand which one it was. Maybe it was the jelly bean hack or something like that. But then I looked up, you can't hear me?
I can't hear it back.
Can you hear now? Okay. So then I looked up, as you were speaking, hacks of iPhone 6 Touch. And I saw that this German guy took pictures of a German minister,
From the press photo.
woman,
Yeah.
and he recreated her thumb from the pictures, and he hacked into her phone. And I was like, oh man. So then I got your point. And it took a little bit, but I got your point.
The point is there, you've got consumer grade hardware running in a mobile phone. It's, yeah, Apple might charge £5 million for an iPhone, but at the end of the day it's made in China for about $5.
Right.
And all it is a high-res camera looking for an image. It's not doing anything too clever. So that hack was literally, they took a press photo, a high-res press photo issued by the German government of whatever the minister was, and zoomed in on their finger and put it in front of a phone fingerprint reader, and it logged them in. I mean, because that's doing, all the reader's doing is looking for a picture to match up on. And there's loads of them on YouTube. You can use a jelly baby to put it on a fingerprint reader. There's little bits to do with it, but the nice thing about YouTube is there's very good instructions on how to go about the hacks. You don't really think about it too much. But it's the joy of having consumer grade hardware trying to do something that it's not really meant to be. But as a convenience to unlock your phone, great. It's essentially typing in a PIN code in the middle of the tube. So in that regard, it's more secure and more convenient. But would you then trust it to authenticate you into your NatWest banking application, which NatWest is now allowed to do?
Well, I have been trusting it.
Well, then you're going to make a call and you're going to keep trusting it.
Yeah, but back to your point, I think you need to understand the identity model and what the value of that authentication step with fingerprint. It's an attribute to a decision engine. This is why we said, like within iBox, we go within the trust elevation method. We look at the authentication as attributes, and then the trust is the summation of attributes. And you cannot say it's the fingerprint. The fingerprint will let you go into the phone. But to take an application to back-end server to do something on your behalf, more needs to be done on the back
Totally
end.
agree.
And this is why with iBulbs, we enroll you with those up front. So we know what you need to do, okay, before you even start interacting with the system. But the fingerprint is not small, you know, to go work with the assumption that your biometric is public. That's it. It's a public password. Actually, it's a password that you have put on Google front page. That's the assumption that you need to work with. How you secure it in the back end, this is why it takes the collection of the attributes. That's why we call our work classification, because of that. And that's what, when I was working with the bank, it was fundamental. How can you use FIDO to do a financial transaction? The trick is in the enrollment, if you do it right, and the trick is in the back end binding between the FIDO attestation and the application. And this is like coupling. But not part of the problem why FIDO will end failing is because that back end binding, not too many relying parties have the money to do it, and they don't want to do it. They just want your business. They're either going to rely on someone else or just let everybody through the door. We're going back to the same problem with password. But you know, it's a little bit more secure because now your phone is in the middle, at least. You know, so the hacker has to have access to something physical that you do. But you know, the same with your bio pen. Your bio pen on its own, it's not good for me. It's in combination with others can do. You know, I could see a lot of good use cases in the hospital, at least like with my professional, who can have access to what you do with bio pen. So now a hacker has to have your fingerprint and your bio pen and your phone, and you give them context of interaction. It's very tough. It's not immune.
I think BioP is much more protected by itself than a fingerprint.
Of course. But
not visible biometric.
But anybody can steal your hair and go enroll under you if you don't do the proper verification.
You cannot.
Why you cannot? What do you do verify when you do the biosample?
If you're not an authorized biobank to have
the
biopins produced, then
Yeah, fine, but I have to provide you with a document saying it's me to the biobank to type. And that document will be.
the biobank doesn't have to know. We are now talking about anonymous medical data in a biobank. The biobank doesn't have to know who you are. The biobank doesn't want to know who you
Yeah,
are.
but all he's saying there is this random number and that tests back to you based on your biometric. That's all what he's saying. And then once you take that piece of data, you can bind it to anything through any cheating system. Does not really matter. And this is the flow. It's a whole cycle. You are as good as your weakest link. If you enroll at LOA1, everything will LOA1. Okay? It's not only the biometric that's uniquely encoded, it's bonded to what? Like getting any birth certificate in the US, going to the US government, getting the passport with that person's name. The passport is as good a credential as well. But still, the way you got the passport, the proper validation was not done. And the value of that credential was down the drain.
I don't see your problem.
Now,
Well,
it's like,
what's interesting about this conversation is, if you think about reality, you know, we are reality, right? Underneath these clothes. And Stephen's point is sort of, well, it's horrible. And your point is, well, there's no issue with this because the this token which is generated from the blood or whatever it is all secure. I think Abby is on the right track because what it is, it's a combination of factors that deal with risk. So in some situations, it's fine to use a password. It can be hacked, replaced, it's a pain in the butt, but it works. In some cases, the iPhone thumb thing is worth the risk. Because I'm not going to have somebody come up with gel to use it for using. I mean, I guess I'm getting at is a lot of times we don't look at this from a holistic point of view and say there's a set of risks that have to be addressed. This is a technique that you're making available, and you have to look at it in the context of its overall implementation, and then you can make a judgment about the risk instead of just waving it away. So that's not a problem. I think there are problems with everything you do because we're flesh and blood, and all you're doing is trying to have a representation of your identity, as you said. It's not really your identity, it's a representation of your identity, or it's an identifier. So I guess I'm just saying, to have a useful discussion, you have to look at it in context, which is what a good security professional would do, and say, this is how we're conducting it. Just an observation. I think it's too glib, I think, in a way to say this is a pyramid and it's all disaster. Well, of course it is, but what are the alternatives? Let's talk about the alternatives.
I mean, the problem with the biobank is no different than typical authority. How many of them got?
It's an issue, I think.
Yeah, it's an issue. Anybody can fake what the biometric is. If you don't go to the proving where you can prove the biobank is you, there are a percentage of errors that will happen.
Dave, you had your hand up, or were you just stretching?
Talk later.
I just want to make one little point, is that I think, which is to do with Apple exceptionalism again, which, I don't think that the discussion of Touch ID is terribly useful in this context, because Touch ID really isn't a security technology. The security technology is the trusted execution environment and secure element. Touch ID is a convenience technology. And I can take pictures of the minister's fingerprints and whatever, and that looks good in the Daily Mail, but in security terms, it's like, so what? I get to take a picture of putting it in a pin. It doesn't mean anything. Like Touch ID is a null factor in security. It doesn't make any difference to security. It's only a convenience. And that's obviously what we're doing. If I take pictures of the minister's fingerprints, I still want to steal her iPhone. And, she'll notice that if you stole my iPhone, I would notice, I don't know what the average is, 40 seconds or something. I mean, so in security terms, Touch ID is meaningless. It's a null factor. It's a convenience technology. It's not a security technology. So it is my point.
I'd agree with that statement. It is very convenient to unlock your phone with that instead of a horrible PIN code. And that's exactly the point. However, general perception is that, oh, that's biometrics, therefore that's security. And that's why I think just a discussion on this and where it's appropriate to fit it in is the debate, not rather, oh, yes, let's use biometrics and not something else. It's like, no, there's no silver bullet one way to do everything. It's about appropriateness, and especially it's about risk. So when you're talking about, I want to unlock my phone to check my text messages, a convenient and risk-appropriate way might well be a fingerprint. But then is that the same risk that I'm going to be taking to load up my banking app on my phone to then transfer some money? And it doesn't challenge me for anything new because I've already pressed my fingerprint on it. And that's where it's like, well, probably need something else because I'm now doing a much higher risk level event or transaction. I should be doing a step-up verification through whatever the mechanism is, but it shouldn't be just for something that was designed to be convenient. And that's what actually is being deployed by banks today.
I think rather than talking about the iPhone, MasterCard are rolling out cards, I think is it Norway and Poland or somewhere in Asia with fingerprint authentication, doing it with a Norwegian company.
I'll do a paddy action and eat my hat if any bank actually issues one of those cards. But what they're issuing in Asia is press releases, not cards. That's a different. But I just want to come back on the convenience thing a bit more. So, for example, on this phone, my wife and I have both got our fingerprints registered on this phone because sometimes she needs to pick up the phone and checks all, we have a joint bank account. It's convenient, whoever's phone is nearest. Like, if you had real biometric security on this, that would make it worse. That would make it less useful, less interesting. I don't want a phone that has J. This isn't like launching nuclear missiles. It's a check. So I think convenience actually is a fantastic way of using biometrics.
I agree.
It's just not security.
I agree.
Yeah, it's the back end binding the homework that you have to do to enable a transaction. I mean, it changes the scale. Before you just had the server at the provider, and you got 1 million passwords. Now we're saying no, you have to have one device at a time. We changed the playing field. Doesn't mean that what this gonna do is gonna shift it to a lot of session stealing type attacks, man-in the middle type attacks. This is why relying on SSL now on its own there's a lot of vulnerabilities we're finding in SSL. Why? Because now SSL is your safety link, but it changes the playing field on the back end, but from the back application. Is it you or your wife? Okay, that is what I need to know now. Okay, stuff like that. but we assume that it's your phone. We know it's your location, we know your fingerprint, we know a lot of other things around, you know, it's within the area of risk, within the risk parameter.
Yeah, Rick.
Yeah, another shout. I mean, I mentioned yesterday Kim Cameron's comment here 2 years ago that the device knows who he is. Now, that is based on the multiple sensors, memory chips, and whatever in that device. Going to David's model, they're sharing that device. I know people that give their phone to their teenage sons to go clubbing with at night to confuse those that might be monitoring and picking up that identity from said sensors in the phone. So I think there is a valid biometric sensor in identity, so whether it's biometric or not, it's sensor-based identity around the device, but it can be confused and I accept your point that you need something else. But I think that the more sensors you get in the devices, the more focused that movement and identification can be used. Whether it's good enough for a high-level authentication is another debate. It's not the same debate.
Right, there are other things on the phone that can be used. Other biometric, I think there are about 19 different biometric sensors that could be used for authentication, but not the fingerprint that's being used at present. But that isn't being used at the moment. It's in the future. So as far as I'm concerned, the question mark still hasn't gone away from the question. Does anybody disagree with that?
I will see how I'm going to say it where it's politically correct.
You don't have to. It's okay.
You're in good company here.
I will erase half of the question mark because the way we're going for it is even your biometric, whether it fails or code on a device, becomes a step-up authentication based on the device. For example, you can do cognitive biometric, which is the way you hold the device, whatever it's you. Now your image resolution, whether you're dead or alive, you can go into a lower resolution by face recognition. So you have better accuracy and faster execution.
Your iPhone knows whether you're dead or alive?
Yeah. Your phone knows everything about you. And like Ken said it, he was right. So you can have the stepping up or down at the protocol algorithm level that goes on your phone. And so it's gonna become more convenient, and the pressure on that, it's the username password is dead. There's a lot of people against it. So biometric is here to assume a role. You know, Touch ID is already being used everywhere. You know?
People have been pronouncing the death of username and password for years. But as Stephen
Been for
pointed
decades,
out,
and it's still alive and well today.
You know, you're right, because when I design for security, what's the bottom line? At the end of the day, it's username and password if all fail. And you have to go and you put your bar in terms of security at that level. But now we have more sensors that can give us better confidence. So the username password is not really, it's you. It is with other combinations doing biometric theft.
Who's got a new smartphone in the last few months?
Yesterday.
Okay. And how many times did you have to enter yet another email address and a password into how many dozen applications just to get the damn thing working for you to do your day-to-day life that we've got used to by having these smart devices?
Yeah, right.
So are they dead? You'd like to kill them, we all would, but they are entrenched in every single latest bit of kit that we have that rolled off the production line last week still.
Yeah, but try to reset your Yahoo password or your Google password or your Facebook password and see.
No, it just sends me an email to my Hotmail address and I click a link and it asks me
They
for
did
a
it before. The trend is to be more careful, you know. And but yeah, you cannot just reset your Yahoo email in 1 second anymore. You know, it's not. And remember, phishing work two together because they are part of the cycle. Okay?
Back to convenience as well, though. Generally, that always wins with human beings and users, the path of least resistance. So if you've tried setting up like Google two-step verification before, and then try and add your new Android phone to sync your Gmail account, and go through the hoops you have to jump through to make that work, because now you've got OTP logons on your account, but the phone needs a static password because it can't ask you for a PIN every time it syncs, and it's just a mess trying to link that stuff together.
But Chrome saves all of your passwords too.
Oh yeah, that's again about convenience, not security.
Yeah, but if we do a two-step to Chrome, you can still get the better. I mean, Android, even your Wi-Fi passwords, when it restores your phone, you don't have to remember your password on any Wi-Fi that you have been on before.
Yep, a lot of phones do that, and it's all about adding convenience back to a problem that is highly inconvenient.
Okay.
But unfortunately, at the end of the day, you forget your password, wherever these things are, it's where's the I forgot my password link. Click that, walk through some really stupid process, and I have a brand new password. And most of the time, it's either sends an email to an address I've got registered, or it's going to ask me for my mother's maiden name, or my favorite football team, or something I've already got on Facebook that I'm all unable to know anyway. And now I have a new password. And the reset process is normally the weakest point of any of the password systems, not just the password themselves.
That's correct. So if you can enhance that component, you improve the usability.
Okay, I think we should wrap up here. I'd like to conclude by saying I think all three of our panelists are right. Yeah, it's really painful. So I think Stephen has added a major dose of reality, one that we're all familiar with, which has been very useful. The concession was that biometrics have a role, defining what that role is. I think JJ's presentation is really interesting. I think the future of biometrics, what he's presented, it needs a lot more work. It needs to be field tested and rolled out, and I guess if anybody in the audience has got money left over after they've given it to Chris Cooper, just give it to JJ. Or maybe JJ could work with EEMA in the States. Trying to help you guys here.
We'll take money too, by the way.
Yeah, yes. We all can.
I'll take money too.
Yep.
All right. Does anybody not want to take money?
Do you have the right life insurance?
The idea that you could have multiple combinations on the 10 to the minus 59 permutations sounds like a goal that ultimately we might want to get to. So I think there's a lot of validity in the concept of what JJ presented. And then the other kind of balance between these two worlds is what OASIS is doing through iBox, which is kind of the next step forward in where the biometrics go. And I guess I have to agree that the question mark is half empty or half full. So it doesn't disappear altogether, but we can shade it in grey rather than black.